Well, you mentioned Uber, and I actually want to go here next. So, a quick
Yep.
refresher for everybody watching, and Graham, I've been wanting to do this for a while. Um, Here in the U.S. and particularly here in California, we had a piece of legislation called AB 5, which basically said that if somebody is doing a task or doing a service or doing a job that is essential to what that company is all about, then they have to be an employee. And this legislation had some appropriate carve outs that they were still fine tuning. There was still some fine tuning here because obviously there's some areas where somebody shouldn't be designated an employee, i.e., a musician performing at a venue, or a comedian performing at a comedy club, or a freelance journalist or freelance photographer. You get the idea. So they were still fine tuning it, making these carve outs. And the carve outs were pretty apparent, but still needed some, fine tuning, which they were working on. Where this didn't apply, the carve outs, was places like Uber and Lyft, because the drivers, guess what? That's an essential part of the business. It's a service that gets people rides. And so the driver is pretty freaking essential. Now, Uber argued against this. They said, well, actually, we're just making the connections. We're just a connection maker. And my response to that was, okay, next time somebody calls an Uber or Lyft, have their driver show up and be like, hey, nice to meet you. I could drive you to the place where you're going for a fee. Now we know each other. And then have them drive away without the passenger. See how that works. See if they're like, oh, well, Uber's just the matchmaker. 5 stars. It's not going to go down that way.
Here's what the driver should do. The driver should show up and say, I'm your Uber driver, cancel the ride and just pay me cash and we'll leave Uber out of this.
No shit, right? So that's what AB 5 is. Now, Uber and Lyft spent millions of dollars here in California, which, by the way, was a test for the rest of the country, where they had this proposition that would exempt them from all of this. This would exempt them from making their drivers employees. This would exempt them from having to pay living wages. This would basically allow them to keep going without any protections for their drivers whatsoever, which is what they wanted. And they spent millions of dollars on this campaign. You know where else that millions of dollars could have went? Treating their drivers better. But I digress. And unfortunately, California voted against their own interests for the most part, and 22 went the way of Uber and Lyft. I personally voted against Uber and Lyft. I voted, against allowing them to do that. But enough people were like, well, 22, it's bad. If we don't let Uber and Lyft do what they want, it's bad for the drivers. They can't have flex schedules and this and that, which is all bullshit. And 22 went the way Uber and Lyft wanted it to. Well, so the U.S. failed that test. Here's somewhere where it didn't go that way. Over in the U.K., this happened a little while ago. The U.K. Supreme Court says that Uber drivers are not independent contractors. So the Supreme Court over in the UK has ruled that Uber drivers are legally workers, not self-employed contractors, as Uber has argued in courts around the world. The ruling means that drivers in Britain and Northern Ireland are eligible for additional benefits and protections, including a minimum wage. Now, this happened on February 19th of this year, 2021. Well, guess what happened as of recent? Interesting, the connection here, because this just happened. In the UK, give UK drivers a minimum wage. They have to give them a pension, and they have to give them holiday pay.
Oh, well, thoughts and prayers that $1 billion corporation has to pay its employees that have generated all their wealth for them.
Isn't it interesting how that's connected? Isn't it interesting how 22, it went the way Uber and Lyft wanted it to, and that's why you don't see anything like this in the US. But the UK, and again, UK has plenty of problems. They're not perfect, but they passed this test, and the US failed this test.
Because the US is, again, it's, as we've been saying, it is the United States is so easily propagandized. So they'll spend money on Uber will spend money rather than spend the money on helping their employees because they're just evil, soulless sons of bitches. They would rather spend money on a campaign just to win rather than take care of people. And enough Americans buy it. They read some little thing or something on Facebook, and then you have working class, regular people going, yeah, this will be bad for if we pass this bill. They watch some commercial that's all fear-based. During the election season, you see these ads like Prop 22 will make Uber murder their own puppies, or whatever those ads are that they put out there, and Americans are suckers and they'll buy it. Just like, they'll hear death panels of, Obamacare is going to kill your grandmother or whatever. And they say these things like, and they'll just repeat, how are we going to pay for it? And anytime you say Medicare for all, everybody thinks they're so smart. They go, how are we going to pay for it? And then because that's what they heard some dummy on one of the corporate media outlets say. And Americans have been so duped to believe that they're like individuality. I'm a standalone, is actually, that stance is protecting the 1%. Americans haven't figured that out yet. So they'll believe any piece of propaganda you put in front of them. And, it's like, and that's why they vote against their own interests.
And the best part is that all of these questions, there are multiple answers to knock down those questions instantly. How are we going to pay for it? Well, gee, we create our own currency. Let's start there. Also, second answer, we're already paying for it. We already pay more and get less. It's like you have a $300 car payment. Your car payment can be knocked down to $200 and you're getting a better car. And you're asking, how am I going to afford this $200 car payment? Well, you're already paying $3. You're already paying $3. We already pay twice as much. Medicare for all would cost half as much as what we have now. And it would cover everybody. Everybody would be covered. And it costs half as much. Even right-wing think tanks have revealed that. Costs half as much, covers everybody. Way better. That's why the rest of the industrialized world figured this out frickin' decades ago. Like, oh, well, if we don't let Uber and Lyft do whatever they want and exploit drivers, people won't have flexible schedules. That's bullshit. There's flex employee schedules all over the country, even in this one. All over the world, and even in this country, that exists. So that's complete bullshit. Oh, well, it would mess up the way their app would. No, it wouldn't. There's plenty of ways they could adapt their app. And by the way, there's plenty of ways. I mean, these ridiculous arguments where people take like I don't want to say fringe example, but they take like this tiny, minute, for instance, and use it to argue against a policy that would make everything better for everyone. And it's the most ridiculous. Like, it gets more and more absurd where they're like, well, if we have a minimum wage, what about the person who just wants to do an apprenticeship because they want to learn carpentry and they have a trust fund? Like, what are you talking about? Who fed you these ridiculous talking points? First of all, there are apprentice programs. They exist. They're not going to stop existing. I mean, what are you even saying? And in the case of this, they're like, well, what about the person who wants to just drive part-time to supplement their income? Well, first, here's the answer to that. You ready for the answer to that? Here's how it works. What you do is you do an overall assessment of the demand, which companies do all the frickin' time. Uber and Lyft can do this. There are no exceptions. And then what you do is you have a staff of drivers who are treated like employees and are paid living wages and are compensated fairly. And then when you have an excess, that's just a small amount of excess, you offer that work to the people who are just part-time employees or are just contractors because they drive for other places. Problem solved. And in this case, everybody wins. The people who are driving full-time, they get benefits and they're employees and they're treated right. The people who aren't driving full-time, they still get paid better and they still get opportunities. Everybody can win. You know, the only difference in this scenario, the only difference is that the CEOs at the very, very top make a little less. They're still plenty rich, Graham. They're still plenty rich, but they make a little bit less under this model. That's it. And people make these ridiculous arguments that can be knocked over with a frickin' feather to argue against any type of workers' rights whatsoever. And that has been the result of years and years of anti-union, pure propaganda conditioning. And undoing that, Holy shit.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you'll say, well, in this country, they got free healthcare, and they'll bring up some dumb thing that has nothing to do. Well, yeah, they got free healthcare in Australia. Yeah, but they got a really high tax if you want to own an aardvark. And you're like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? Like that has to do with nothing. That has to do like that. We're not talking about aardvarks, you dumb shit. We're talking about free healthcare. Like what like there's a speech JFK gave in 1962 saying we're decades behind Europe. Europe has had free healthcare we're decades behind them. In 1962, like we're talking almost 60 years ago. So we were behind 60 years ago, and now it's worse because healthcare costs are through the roof and people are dying. It's Americans are like stupid 15-year-olds that just can't admit fault. It's just like, but yeah. It's just like, all right, this would be better for you. Union wages would be better for you. Did you know that, everybody got free healthcare, it'd be better for you? No, it wouldn't. Like, it's just like, America just likes punching itself in the face and then blaming somebody else. It's mind boggling. I see why all these people like Glenn Greenwald just left. They moved out of the country. They're like, good luck. All right, I'm bye. You guys are morons.
That's gonna be official commentary on CNN like next year. Like, nuh-uh, but no.
Yeah, I know. It is.
They're like,
what am I? Like, how you gonna pay for it? How you gonna pay for it? How you gonna pay for it? War's good. It's just fucking. It's the dumbest. It's mystifying, and there's no. Like, I see little victories in the local level,
right.
And I think enough smart people can maybe carve out little places, little towns or little areas that are actually smart and for the people, and have a society that's like, let's make this better for people. And I see people out there, finding solutions for like Utah did the Housing First program that they did in Finland. And I'm like, wow, that's really smart. And Florida, for all of its insanity, passed $15 an hour minimum wage. And you're like, okay, they're trying to get Medicare for all in the state of California and the state of Washington. Okay, it might have to just be state by state, but
I think it's going to be. I really do. And that's not completely ideal. Like I'd much rather it happens on the federal level. I just think, it will happen on the federal level, but I think we're going to have to get there one state at a time. And I don't care how we get there, as long as we get there. But realistically, I see it happening kind of similar to cannabis, and it's going to be one state at a time, which again, not ideal, not the way I'd like to see it happen. I just don't see it happening any other way. I think, or at least if we're going to wait for something to happen federally, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer than if one state gets it and that rattles some cages.
Yeah. It's just, and because of this two-party system, these two parties just are keep this stupidity going, because everyone's backing Joe Biden. The dummy liberals are like, yay, he's bombing Syria. He had to. When Trump pulled out of Syria, liberals were critical of him just because it was Trump. If Trump, and this is the problem. If Biden came up with a cure for cancer, the governor of Texas would go, we're not taking that cure. We're Texas. They would just fight against it, because they just got to be against whatever dumb party is in the stupid, corrupt White House. Then the other party is just going to argue against no matter what. That's what this dumb two-party system is all about. Like, and nothing's going to change. We had 8 years of Bush, who was awful and horrible, but they just can't agree with anything he does. And 8 years of Obama. So then the Republicans, he's a socialist, he's a terrorist, where's his long form birth certificate? It's all these dumb arguments, because they can't go, oh wow, he's increasing the war machine and the surveillance state, because that's what they do. So they just got to keep America distracted with these dumb fights. There's like 3 or 4 issues that they kind of separate these parties. And they know they're these willing idiots,
Well, Well, even those 3 or 4 issues are up for debate.
Right.
If there's one thing about the Democratic Party, we are pro-choice. We are pro-choice. We are definitely pro-choice. Here is one of our favorite people in the Democratic Party, Tim Kaine, a dude who ain't pro-choice. So they don't even give you that. I mean, they don't even give you that. And that's the thing where it's the Overton window that we have electorally does not reflect the people who live here at all.
Nope.
I mean, we have two far right wing. I mean, we have a far right wing party in the Democrats, and then we have this unheard of, holy shit, right wing party in the Republicans, where there's just a few kind of wedge issues separating them. And even that, more often than not, is just lip service. And when it comes to the big pillars of, hey, education should be a public good, both aren't on board for that. Healthcare should be a human right. Both aren't on board for that. Housing should be a human right. Both really aren't on board for that. Hey, endless war isn't a way to have an economy. Also, it's morally disgusting on every level. They're both really not on board with that one. These are basic principles that in a lot of other parts of the world are just commonly held truths by most people. But here, you are a radical, baby.
It's America is the dumbest place. There's no place dumber. There's no place dumber on the face of the earth. There's no country dumber than this one in the history of the human race. Like it's, I've studied a lot of history. So if somebody can find a dumber country, find it for me. Like in the history books that has done just willfully more dumb things. Like it's unreal. Like I totally get George Carlin's last special. Like I get and his last interviews where he was just like,
he went down kicking and screaming, man.
Yeah, he did.
He went down kicking and screaming. And it's like that. I mean, that last segment of his, which, it wasn't really even stand up at that point. He was just letting loose. And he was like, I'm fucking done. And it was beautiful. Yeah. And it was, I mean, the FBI didn't want you to hear that bit. And he, it's like they want people just, I don't want to like, but he said, they want people just dumb enough to push the paper, but not awake enough to think critically and to realize that they're getting screwed by a system that threw them over the boat 40 years ago. And he just went off. It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it. And he was doing that in Vegas and he was walking people and he said, I don't give a shit. Put me in a smaller room. And yeah, man, I never got to see that guy live. I'll always regret. I had a chance and I was like, I'll catch him next year. And then he died. So I get to regret that one forever.
Yep. And he's like, they don't care about you. They don't care about you. He would say that over, like these gutless cocksuckers don't care. They don't care about you. They don't give a fuck about you. He said that over and over in that last tirade. Like you say, it wasn't jokes. It wasn't stand up, but it was beautiful and poignant. I mean, the only like joke in there was they call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. And again, and typical and people cheered and thought he was awesome. But again, typical of dumb America, a handful of people would like, I'm out of here. They'd walk out because they don't want to face the truth. America is, and this is a problem with human nature in general, but America really has been so propagandized that they get mad at you for speaking the truth. I mean, people get really mad at you for speaking the truth. They get, and it's, you call out the right-wing Christians, like you're not a Christian. Jesus wouldn't bomb people. Jesus wouldn't build walls. Jesus wouldn't put kids in cages. They get mad at you. And then you go to you out left the liberals. Ooh, nothing gets them more mad than when you out and go, no, Hillary Clinton is a warmonger. What? She's my feminist hero. She's friends with
I'm still with her is trending this morning.
Trending was this morning. I mean, she literally, she had Ghislaine Maxwell at her daughter's wedding. Ghislaine Maxwell has been called by female victims of Epstein a monster, a pedophile sex trafficking monster. And she was at Hillary Clinton's daughter's wedding.
Dude.
I'm with her.
I wanted to ask a real quick, when the George Carlin thing came out, did it annoy you when, I'm sure you encountered this too, you had to have, where like you'd hear comics and like other comedians and they'd just be like, I mean, it just really wasn't all that punchy. I mean, I don't know about you, but when that was happening, I'd just be sitting around. I'm like, first of all, we're about to do a one-nighter in Bozeman, Montana. Second of all, fuck off. Are you serious? Like, they're just not punchy enough. Like, he calls out the entire empire. You're like, God, there just wasn't. I didn't hear the punchlines in that.
I mean, dude, to get specific to our industry, we've talked about this, especially for the 4 years that Trump was in office. No comics, aside from a handful, being you, Lee, Jimmy, a handful of people, were really calling out the problems. Most comic, even some big name ones, were just all they had was a couple of Trump jokes and talk about how great Obama was. I mean, comics that are like, that I respect and think are really good joke writers and good comedians, they wouldn't go after the whole system. They wouldn't criticize they wouldn't criticize the Democrats. They wouldn't criticize the war machine. And they just, it's again, and they think they're so smart and so woke because they got a Trump joke. And it's just like, all right, you refuse to look at this. I mean, and it's just more of the American privilege of not knowing what having your town bombed. We've been bombing Syria for 10 years. I mean, 85,000 dead kids in Yemen.
So
I don't know what more to say to people. And then they get mad when I call out that their Democratic heroes are awful. Okay.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your